So the president-elect, Donald Trump, he has selected former Democratic Congresswoman turned Trump supporter Tulsi Gabbard as his pick to be Director of National Intelligence. If confirmed, that would mean Gabbard would oversee the 18 agencies that make up the entire U.S. intelligence apparatus, including overseeing the CIA. Why this announcement is now sending shockwaves includes Gabbard seen by many as an apologist for brutal foreign powers, including the leader of Syria, the same leader, that man, who has used chemical weapons on his own citizens. Gabbard even traveled to Syria for what she called at the time a fact-finding mission and met with Syrian President Bashar al-Assad. She later responded to questions about that trip with statements like this.
Do you think Assad is our enemy?
Assad is not the enemy of the United States because Syria does not pose a direct threat to the United States.
The man used chemical weapons on his people. And then there is this from National Security Affairs expert Tom Nichols, writing for The Atlantic in a new piece, the following. She has no qualifications as an intelligence professional, literally none. And her appointment would be a threat to the security of the United States.
Welcome to the Ken Harbaugh Show. I am thrilled to have Alex Finley on with me today. That's a pseudonym because she is a former covert CIA operative and author of the Victor Caro series. We'll put a link in the show notes. Alex, what do you make of this potential nomination? Well, I guess it's a nomination, but we'll see if it clears the Senate, of Tulsi Gabbard to be the Director of National Intelligence.
It's difficult to think of somebody worse, although I suppose if we really put our minds to it, we might be able to just directly put Vladimir Putin in the position or something to that effect. She's not a good candidate. I'll leave it at that.
Yeah. Well, you know what? I should probably, for a little comedic relief here, cut to this clip of John Bolton referring to her as the worst cabinet nomination in history, until 5 minutes later when Matt Gaetz was nominated to be AG. Here's John Bolton.
Thanks so much, Ambassador. Tulsi Gabbard, what are your thoughts this morning?
Well, I thought it was the worst cabinet level appointment in history until they then heard about the Matt Gaetz appointment. Really, my reaction was that this is like the legend of Caligula, the Roman emperor, who wanted to nominate his horse as a Roman consul. You had to be a Roman senator at the time to be a consul, and it was intended to show how demeaned and degraded the Roman Senate had become. So now we're going to see whether the American Senate can stand up and reject two people who are totally unqualified, unfit professionally, and really lacking in the immoral characteristics, the character that you need to hold these jobs. I think this vote should be 100-0 against both of them.
Alex, can you talk about the role of DNI, Director of National Intelligence, how it came about after 9/11, and how essential it is to coordinating not just the gathering of intelligence across all of our agencies, but the packaging and delivering of that to our decision makers, and why it has to be a nonpartisan, non-political person in that position?
Sure. So the role of the Director of National Intelligence was created in the wake of 9/11. The idea was that that particular attack was not only a lack of was the result of a lack of imagination across the intelligence community, but also a lack of communication. That, in fact, we had bits and pieces here and there across different agencies, but nobody really talked to each other. So the DNI was created in 2004 to be that office that was coordinating the cooperation across all of these agencies. It has its detractors, it has its critics, but in the end, the position now exists. And so basically, it's our highest intelligence officer in the United States. That person is also charged with briefing the President of the United States. So it is a very important position. And some of the problems that we see with Tulsi Gabbard, well, they're numerous to be putting somebody like her into that type of a position. I would argue, first of all, she has zero experience in intelligence. She's never worked in intelligence. She's also never worked as a manager. So she's being put into a position where she'll be overseeing 17 intelligence agencies who do very complex, difficult work, an environment that's difficult to understand if you don't come from it. And she'll somehow be responsible for all of these people. She's wholly unqualified, just in the sense of being an executive who understands the milieu in which she would be working. Second, I would say one of the big problems with her is she doesn't believe the U.S. intelligence community, over which she will have management, which she'll be overseeing. She's stated straight out that she doesn't believe the intelligence community consensus when they come out and they say, for example, that Bashar al-Assad used chemical weapons. Again, that's a consensus across all of these agencies. It's a consensus with our European allies and others. We know that this happened. She refuses to believe it. So how you have somebody running an office and overseeing a community who doesn't believe in the products and the information coming out of that community, it's difficult to see how that works. But then again, that might be the point, because we know that Trump has a difficult relationship with the intelligence community as is. Third, I would argue about Gabbard is she has repeatedly, I mean, it's not once, it's not twice, it's repeatedly, she has repeated Russian propaganda and Russian disinformation. Even about the United States. She has pushed conspiracies such as the U.S. having biolabs in Ukraine, all kinds of other conspiracy theories. This is problematic, obviously, for a number of reasons. One, again, if you're overseeing a community that deals in empirical evidence, letting the intelligence lead you to the logical conclusions, but instead you peddle in conspiracy theories, that's not great, to put it mildly, because again, you're not trusting the intelligence that's coming to you. Add to that, there are real questions that she is an agent of influence, and I think it's clear she is an agent of influence. It's just a question of, is she being tasked to do so, or does she do it for other reasons?
Can you explain that a bit more? I think you're referring to this suggestion that she is a Russian agent, but there are different kinds. There's the willing Russian agent, which we see in your novels and in spy movies. And then there's the unwitting asset, who is simply a tool, what's the term? A useful idiot, right? For someone like Vladimir Putin, who is very good at manipulating across those. I think we talked about him in our last interview, the 4 aspects of managing an asset. There's, ego and money, and I can't remember the others, but what kind is she, do you think?
Well, so it's not clear. So the 4 are money, ideology, coercion, and ego. That's basically what we refer to when we talk about what motivates a source when you're trying to recruit somebody. But also, like you said, there's a big spectrum here of somebody who's a useful idiot who just sort of acts in the way that's useful to you, and somebody who's really a recruited asset who is meeting with a handler, getting what we call taskings from that handler, is possibly being paid to take specific actions on behalf of that handler. In this case, one would argue a Russian intelligence officer. So we don't know where she is on that spectrum, but we can definitely say that in pushing Russian narratives, Russian disinformation, Russian propaganda, Russian information manipulation, because disinformation, that word gets thrown around a lot. A lot of times the information is true, but it's used in a very manipulative way. Her willingness to do that shows us, again, that she is not working in the world of facts, in the world of truth and empirical evidence, which again is where the intelligence community is coming from. But she's much more ready to deal and peddle in conspiracy theories, which are not based on any kind of truth or evidence or facts, and are much more about manipulating emotions to gain control over an information space. And I think that's actually one of the bigger problems here, right? Is that Trump, one of the very first things that he announced was this idea that he's going to stop federal money going to studying disinformation and information manipulation. And if you then can get your intelligence agencies on your side to be using intelligence in a political way rather than in a non-political national security way, you're doing much more to pollute that information ecosystem. And that's where it gets very, very scary in terms of moving along the spectrum of authoritarianism.
It's Ken Harbaugh. Quick break here to let you know that we'd love to hear from you. Your comments, suggestions, thoughts about future topics and guests. Email us at info@thekenharbaughshow.com and make sure to rate and review us on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks, and back to the show. You've been on the inside. You've also written very critically but satirically about the agency and the intelligence establishment. How resistant do you think our intelligence agencies can be to this kind of political pressure, especially when, the call is now coming from within the House if Gabbard is indeed confirmed? The whole point is to deliver intelligence that will drive policy, but the Trump approach seems to be to craft policy and now seek intelligence to affirm or bolster that policy. It's totally backwards.
It's completely backwards. I like that you think he even crafts policy. I'm not even convinced that he does that. I think he's very inconsistent and reckless. But you're correct in the idea that what you don't want is an intelligence community feeding those whims. You want policy to lead, again, based on that empirical intelligence that's being fed to them. I would argue that last time around, the last Trump administration, the intelligence community, there were fears about what was going to happen there. I would argue it remained more or less insulated. You had Mike Pompeo there first at CIA, for example, and then you had Gina Haspel. So I'm speaking much more specifically now about CIA. Gina Haspel was a career case officer. And so I think she sort of kept the agency a little bit protected. So what the CIA does and how they do it isn't very well understood. I have definitely found when you sort of go out into the general world, I think even a number of people within Trump's orbit don't really understand how it works. So having somebody like Haspel in charge was insulated the agency from some of those political, diktats that were sort of coming down. That's changed, I think, this time around. You're going to have people directly involved in the bureaucracy of intelligence gathering. We're still hearing talk about whether Kash Patel might end up over there in a very integral role where he actually would be overseeing how the agency is running and functioning. That gets very scary because then you have political people in place, again, who are very willing to use that intelligence for political purposes. We saw this, we haven't discussed John Ratcliffe yet. He's been nominated to be director of CIA. We saw this with him last time around when he was acting DNI, or maybe he was officially confirmed, I don't recall. But he was in the position of director of national intelligence. And he already proved his willingness to use intelligence for political purposes and against the national security of the United States. He was very willing to paint a false narrative that Hillary Clinton had basically set up the whole what they call Russia hoax, that she had set this up to make Trump look bad, which we know is not true. The Mueller investigation proved it was not true. A bipartisan Senate report showed that it was not true. We know Russia interfered in the 2016 election. We've seen them doing it since. So to have somebody in a position who's ready to use that position to please the king for political purposes is anathema, and I would say unforgivable within the intelligence community.
You're living overseas now. Part of me can't blame you, but how are our allies reacting to this, from the prospect of future intelligence sharing to just the moral shock of what is happening? What are you hearing?
I think there's a lot of distraught people, wondering what this means, what this looks like in the future. I think the transatlantic relationship was able to survive the first Trump administration. We'll see how it goes the second time around. There's much less trust. That, the trust was sort of rebuilt when Biden was elected. Okay, we can sort of go back to having these relationships. But putting Trump back in, I think has caused some serious damage in the long term. There's definitely questions about intelligence sharing. Can that administration be trusted with other countries' secrets? And this goes even beyond, Ratcliffe or beyond Gabbard. Trump left office with thousands of classified documents and left them in Mar-a-Lago, where, he showed them to people just to sort of show off. That's not somebody, if you're risking somebody's life to collect information, you're not going to be really quick to want to share that with that administration. And that, in the end, puts America at risk. I mean, that's sort of what gets lost in the circus that we all are sort of caught up in every day, is that these really do have real effects on our national security.
I want to ask you about those people. You were one of them once who do risk their lives to gather this intelligence, to provide policymakers and decision makers with the best picture of the world they can to make some of the toughest decisions imaginable. How is the morale at CIA or within the IC more broadly going to be affected if someone like Tulsi Gabbard's in charge?
It's difficult to say. I'm not on the inside. I haven't been there for quite a while. Look, I would imagine it's demoralizing to have somebody in charge of you who doesn't believe in what you do. Why go out and do it then? But again, a certain amount of operations continued and analysis continued under the last Trump administration. I think we're going to just have to see how it plays out to see if, again, the agencies can remain a bit insulated, as we saw last time. These are the people who are nominated. We don't know if they'll actually be put into place, although it looks so far like the Senate isn't really interested in much pushback. And who knows once they actually get in? My fear is that indeed retribution and personal vendettas are going to be top of the priority. Top priorities. But maybe they'll get in and actually the workers will be able to continue what they're actually doing. I have very little hope for that. I have to admit, I'm very much a pessimist on this one.
Well, it's amazing that we're at the point where we are betting national security on a maybe. We're in for a rough ride. Would love to talk to you again as things play out. Thanks, Alex, so much for joining us.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Love this video? Make sure you stay up to date on the latest breaking news and all things Meidas by signing up to the MeidasTouch newsletter at MeidasTouch.com/newsletter.